Hello everyone, back online again. I just thought I'd take the opportunity today to show you the beautiful place that I live, and just so grateful that I live here in this time, and so grateful for everything that God has given me. Preparing for today was a little bit tricky because I had an idea in my mind what I wanted to do. I've been looking at Genesis, and last time I spoke to you we looked at Adam and Eve. So the next kind of story along in the book is the story of Cain and Abel, and I thought that maybe today we could look at that because it's about offering to God and about sacrifice, and it ties in quite nicely with the fact that we're doing communion today. So that was all sorted out in my mind. But a few weeks ago I had this weird dream, and every now and then I have a dream that I remember, but this one I remember waking up and thinking, what on earth was that about? And I thought about it over the next few days, and I think that I got some kind of an idea revealed to me about what it was meaning. And so for quite some time now I've been asking God to reveal himself to me and asking him to show me his truth. And so I thought maybe it would be a bit silly of me to ignore it. So I couldn't decide. Cain and Abel and sacrifice, or my dream. And then about a couple of days ago, it suddenly occurred to me that they were actually quite closely linked. So I decided I'm just going to go with the dream. Dreams are quite weird things. No one really understands what goes on when you dream. When you think about it, we spend probably a third of our lives in bed, and we kind of feel that a lot of the time we go to bed, we sleep, and everything just gets shut down until wake up time. But that's not actually the case. If you put a brain activity monitor on, you'll see that your brain's just as active when you're asleep, when you're dreaming, as when you're awake. And look, the patterns of the brainwaves are different, but there's a lot going on, and we're just not conscious of what it is. So I've been looking into the psychology of dreams a little bit, and the most famous guy that talked about dreams was Freud. But I find a lot of his stuff is kind of really weird. It's really out there, and so it doesn't appeal to me that much. But there's a guy, one of his contemporaries, a guy by the name of Carl Jung, who made a lot of sense to me. He believed that dreams are the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And I think he's onto something there. It's almost like a dream is a thought that's under construction. And so I think it's quite important. I think it's quite, maybe it's God's sense of humor a little bit. I'm not a kind of a mystic prophet type of guy, into those kind of weird things. So it probably appealed to God's sense of humor to speak to me through a dream, and see what I made of it. Joel 2 verse 28, and it's also almost word for word in Acts 2:17. And afterward I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. So maybe I can take from that I'm a bit old for the visions, but dreams are still a possibility. So let me just kick off by giving you a brief rundown of what was in my dream as I remember it. I was on tour with a group of guys. We were doing some kind of music production. We were touring in a place that felt like somewhere in Eastern Europe, like maybe East Berlin during the 1970s or 1980s, when it was in the depths of communism. And we arrived at the performance venue to do our rehearsal, And the guy there said to us, this is a bit of a dodge place. You know, there's a lot of crime around here. Your stuff's not going to be safe. So we all jumped in the bus, loaded our bags up again, went to the hotel and checked in. And I took my valuable possessions and I put them in the hotel safe. I put them in quite an ornate looking wooden box. And then I locked them in the safe and put the key in my pocket. Went off to do my rehearsal. And that went well. And when I came back, when I opened the cupboard, I saw that the safe was standing open. First thing I did was check to see if I still had the key, and it was in my pocket. There's something else I noticed though. There was a very elaborate looking metal structure, like a kind of like a key, and I knew immediately that was a machine for picking the locks, and it was lying there next to the safe in the cupboard. Looking inside the safe, I saw that the box was gone, but there were a whole lot of my valuables were still left there, lying in the bottom of the safe. The pile of stuff that was left seemed quite a lot smaller than the pile of stuff that I'd locked away there. But I went through it quite carefully, and I couldn't see anything that was missing. Couldn't find anything. Couldn't remember what was gone. Anyway, after having this dream, I said to Kath, I had this weird dream. I don't know what it means. I better tell you. And it's a good thing I did, because you know how dreams are. If you don't act, if you don't speak them out or write them down, in a couple of hours you've forgotten them altogether. So I can't say that dream is everything that I dreamt. It's just what I remembered saying to Kath. Anyway, over the next few days, I thought about it quite a bit, and I prayed to God and asked him if this was a message of some sort from him, if he could just help me to interpret it. And this is what came to mind. Why music? And what was I doing performing music in an Eastern European country? It's not something I've ever dreamt about before, and it's not something I've ever really wanted to do. And I think part of the reason is that music is a strange thing. It's extremely valuable. It's extremely important. All societies throughout history have had a lot of music built into them. And it's even today, music is really important to a lot of people, especially young people. A lot of young people are very into their music, and even to the extent that a lot of their identity and their values are shaped by the music they listen to. So we know without a doubt that music's extremely important, but we just have no idea why. And I think this the significance of this is that God's plan is extremely important. It's very complex, and we really don't understand it a lot of the time. But we understand enough to know that it's really important. And so sometimes you need to go out and play music, even if you don't know why you're doing it. Sometimes you just have to follow God's plan, knowing that it's really important, even though you don't understand the specific details of why. Next thing I want to mention is that I found the key in my pocket. So what do you think the significance of that is? Well, I think what it tells me is that the stuff that got stolen, the theft that happened, it wasn't my fault. You know, I'd done everything that I reasonably could to secure it. It was out of my hands. I'd done what I could, but the thief still came. And you could argue that maybe it was a bit of a stupid thing to go on a music tour in Eastern Europe in those years. And you've got a point there. But I do think that very complicated looking lock-picking device, I do think that could have just as easily been used to pick the lock on my safe at home. And so sometimes we try to make everything safe and secure and look after everything in our lives. And sometimes we're just deluding ourselves. The thief can come whether you're at home or you're out there doing important work. And I think especially in these times where life is so challenging at the moment, I think we need to make sure that we keep on focusing outwards. You're vulnerable wherever you are. Next thing, why box? What was that wooden box all about? It was quite a cool wooden box. It was nicely carved. There were some inlays of maybe mother of pearl, but it was a container. It had no intrinsic value of its own. And I think it kind of represents the structure that we have in our lives. We put a lot of importance on having everything ordered in its place. And there's a whole kind of network that we build our lives around. And I think that's represented by the box. It could be that it also represents our body. And that's quite scary to think that the thief can just come and take all the structure out of your life, all the organization, everything that's in its right place. That whole thing can be disrupted, and he can maybe even take your body from you. And why did he take the box? I think exactly that. He thought that the box was valuable. He thought that the value of our existence lay in the life that we had. So that brings me on to what was missing. And it's quite strange that I couldn't identify what was missing. But then I thought about it. It's like if you have a burglary at home and you phone up the insurance company and you start filling in the forms. You got to make a list of all the stuff that's gone missing. And maybe there's like an old squash racket that's been living in the back of your cupboard for 10 or 15 years that you'd completely forgotten about. Now, to the insurance company, that has value. Maybe to the thief, that has value. The insurance company just says, well, squash racket, X amount of value. But to me, that racket lost its value many years ago. You see, when something better comes along, when I got my new squash racket, that old racket lost its value. And so often that's the case. We're carrying around a whole lot of stuff with us that used to be valuable to us. But once we turn to God and we get something new and something better, that value is gone. But we still hang on to the possessions. Then the question is, why did the thief come and leave a whole lot of stuff, especially valuable stuff? And I think there's only two possible reasons I can think of. The one is that he didn't recognize the value. And there are lots of cases in the Bible where there are things that at first glance don't seem very valuable, but Jesus makes it very clear that they have got value. Think of something like humility. Now, the devil's a really arrogant creature. I mean, he did rebel against God and try and rule the world, so he's arrogant. So he probably doesn't see any value in humility. So if he was breaking into your life, that would be the last thing he'd want to take away from you. The second reason, the other examples too, if you just read in Matthew, like the Beatitudes, all those things that Jesus says, which seem like paradoxical, that they seem like the opposite of what we intuitively believe. They're things of value which we can't recognize. And the second reason I think he left some stuff was that he couldn't touch it. And he couldn't touch it because it was not my stuff. It was God's stuff. Now, just think about the story of Job in the Old Testament. It's quite a difficult story to get your head around. But one of the things is that the devil gives Job a really hard time. He keeps on cranking it up to the next level. But each time he does that, he has to get God to sign off on it. And I think it's like that. There's certain things that the thief cannot take unless God allows him. And those are the things that we have offered to God. Those are the sacrifices we've made. You see, that is the link with the story of Cain and Abel. We make certain offerings to God, and if he accepts them and they're worthy, then they become his, and the devil can't touch them. But there's another side to that coin too, because once we've handed it over to God, it's no longer ours. And maybe God's plan is not the same as ours. And maybe the thing that we thought is so valuable, God decides to do away with. And that's not very nice for us to experience. But you see, we've got to remember that the devil can break into that safe and take what's yours. And I think I'd rather trust things that are valuable to me into the hands of God than into a hotel safe or the safe in my bedroom at home. I think there's a hint to that that second option as well, in the fact that the thief left the very complicated looking lockpick behind. And I think that wasn't a mistake. I think he did that on purpose. I think that he knew there were certain things of value that he couldn't touch. But I think he didn't want me to realize that. So it was like a kind of an act of intimidation. He left the lockpick to say, look, I can get into your safe. I can get into any safe. And I can do it whenever I like. And this fancy tool that I use, that's not even important to me. I've got plenty more where that came from. So it's an act of bravado and intimidation on the part of the thief. Because he doesn't want me to realize that there's certain things he can't touch. He's trying to put on an act. So now I've brought us round to the story of sacrifice, the story of Cain and Abel. And next time I speak to you, I'll expand on that a little bit more. But for now, I'd like to just talk about sacrifice a little bit more. There was an experiment done a few years ago. I saw it reenacted in a TV documentary to do with marshmallows. So what they did is they'd bring a child into a room, and there would be a marshmallow on the table in front of them. And they said to the child, you can eat this marshmallow now. Or if you wait, I'm not sure, it might have been 5 or 10 minutes, then you can get 2 marshmallows. But if you eat it now, that's it. There's nothing more coming your way. And it was quite funny to watch, and probably also quite cruel of the guys that set up the experiment. It was quite interesting the way the children reacted. Some of them just scoffed at marshmallow immediately. Others went to great lengths to distract themselves from the temptation in front of them. They'd sing songs or play games or turn around and face their back to the marshmallow. But it's interesting that apparently between the age of 2 and 4, a child learns that sometimes sacrifice is necessary. They learn to leave the marshmallow and rather have 2. And if they don't, it's actually things turn out quite badly for them. Because to fit into society, you have to learn the value of sacrifice. You think about it, if you do exactly what you want whenever you want to, it won't be very long before people just aren't prepared to put up with you anymore. So your sacrifice is like making a bargain with the future. You do without now because you know something better is coming on. But there's more to it. Sometimes you can up the stakes. And if there's more at stake, bigger sacrifices might be needed. Like, for example, say you lived in a couple of thousand or maybe even a couple of 100 years ago, and there was a famine, and you're really hungry, and your family are starving. and you've got a little bit of grain left. And you have to choose, do we eat this grain now, or do we just try and tough it out, because that grain's the seed for next season? And if we eat that grain, then it impacts the family next year, and the children of my children, and my grandchildren, and their grandchildren. And so there's a future benefit to keeping the seed. But I don't know exactly what that is. I just know that it's good. So a larger sacrifice might be required for a bigger benefit. But maybe the best possible good can be achieved by the biggest possible sacrifice. And, it's probably a good idea to think a little bit about what that means. What is the biggest sacrifice you can imagine having to make? And for me, there's only two candidates that come to mind. The one is to sacrifice myself, and the other is to sacrifice my child. And I like to think that if I was faced with that decision, I would sacrifice myself so that my child could live. But obviously, I don't know, maybe in the moment I would just turn out to be a coward. But I think that as a parent, most of us would say that that's what we would like to. We recognize that as being the biggest sacrifice. What is the best possible good? I'm not sure. I don't really know. But I know that by definition, I want it. See, sometimes we need to sacrifice who we are for who we can become. And that's what being born again is all about. There's another little story I'd like to tell you now. I'm sure you've all heard it before. It's a story about how to catch a monkey. And it goes something along the lines of, you get a jar with an opening that's just large enough for the monkey to squeeze his hand into. And then you half fill the jar with rocks so it's too heavy for the monkey to carry. Then you throw something tasty inside the bottle, like maybe some mealie pips. Sprinkle a few mealie pips around outside on the ground. And the story is that the monkey comes along, he eats the pips on the ground, and he gets a taste for it. And the part of his brain, the amygdala, starts to fire, and it's a very powerful part of his brain, and it says, you need to eat this food. And he sees the pips in the jar, and he squeezes his hand in, grabs a handful, and now he can't get his hand out. But it's right there. What he really wants most is right in his hand, and he can see the hunter coming, but he just can't get himself to let go. And the story is that the hunter can just wander up to the monkey and grab it. And I don't know if that's true. Probably not. I don't think it would work in actual, but it illustrates quite an interesting point. Nobody knows what that monkey could have done if it had just managed to sacrifice what was in its hand, if it just managed to let go and run away. No one knows what the future could have been. It could have done amazing things, that monkey. It could have had generations of other monkeys that come from it. But the monkey, he didn't know what the future benefit was, but he wasn't prepared to make the sacrifice. And I think so often we do exactly that. We get our hands onto something that we really like, and we just decide we're not letting go no matter what. And the future's a little bit cloudy and a little bit far off. And we can kind of get an inkling that will be worth letting go. It will be worth doing the right thing. It will be worth sacrificing now for a future benefit. But we're not too clear what that future benefit is. So we just hang on to what's in our hand. Talking about the biggest sacrifice being maybe necessary for the biggest possible good. God's done that. I said there were two possible sacrifices that might be like the most hectic sacrifices I can imagine. One sacrificing myself and the other sacrificing my child. Well, in one event, with Jesus on the cross, God did both of those things. He made the biggest possible sacrifice for the biggest possible good. And what was that good? I think it's to do with fixing the universe. It's to do with restoring the whole of creation to the way it should be. Now that cost God a lot, and he's God. He didn't need to do it, but he chose to do it because he thought the future benefit was worth it. And I think that we need to acknowledge that. And I think that we need to recognize that we need to make the ultimate sacrifice. We need to hand over everything we have to God. We need to trust him that this future benefit is worth it. And we need to bring him all the things that we value most in our life and just lay them at his feet. And I think this is what we must think about when we do our communion now. I'd just like to thank Laura for doing the hosting today. And I'd just like to, as we're going to take communion ourselves while the last song plays. Thanks very much to Katie for choosing the songs we heard earlier. I'm going to play this last song now. And while that song's going on, I think we should each take communion. And just because we're offline or online at the moment, don't skip the communion part. I think it's really important. I don't know why. I'm not really big into rituals and stuff like that. I know that communion's all about recognizing and what God did for us on the cross. But I think there's more to it than that. Human beings, we're made of mind, body, soul, spirit. We're like a package deal. And we know that all those things are interconnected. Like, for example, if your mind's not in the right place, then maybe a bit of exercise can help fix your mind. And so I think that maybe if your spirit's not in the right place, doing something physical can be meaningful. I don't know how, but I just feel there's a lot more to communion than simply just recognizing Jesus' sacrifice. So as we play this last song, I'd just like to ask you to take communion. But before we do that, if we can just close our eyes in prayer. Lord God, we just thank you for everything that you've done for us. We thank you for the sacrifice you made on the cross. We thank you for everything that you've entrusted to us in this life. Lord, as I look at this beautiful farm before me, I've invested so much in this, Lord. I've given it so much time and so much attention, but I recognize it's not yours. I hand it over to you. I hand my life over to you, Lord. I can trust you to look after what's valuable to me, far more than I can trust a hotel safe. Lord God, we just acknowledge that times are tough and that some people are going through hectic stuff. Some people are making big sacrifices and some people are suffering. Lord God, we just know that in the end you have a plan. We trust that that plan is a good one. And we know that whatever we have to go through now, the future benefit is worth it. And we just know that one day we'll look back on this life that we have like an old squash racket, and we'll just think it's got no value because we've got something new, we've got something better, and that you have that waiting for us. Lord God, we thank you for everything you've done. In the name of your precious Son, Jesus. Amen.